Hello, this is Goku4SM1, and this is my first video at being back. And what I mean back is I never really left YouTube. I just was unable to do videos in the way I wanted to do them. And now I can just do random videos like this. And this is something I'd been wanting to do for a while. There was a couple things, like I did want to talk about the Superman reboot and how Zod was... Everybody thought Zod was the villain, but it was really... The director had stated he wasn't. But that's old news, and this is something that is still relevant, and will always be relevant. There's something that came to my attention a while ago, and it's just how we perceive what a villain in a film is. And this is mainly going to talk about DC, and if anybody wants... And this is more of... If you want to do your own video, I want to hear what people think about this, and what you describe as a villain in a superhero movie, mainly superhero movies. What determines if they are a villain or not? What is the deciding factor? So, I'm going to begin the discussion. And please come on and do your own videos and tell me what you think about what I have to say. If I'm right or wrong, I don't care. I'm open to any criticism anybody wants to give me. But please reply if you can. I would love to hear what you have to say about this. But now, I'm going to begin with Batman Begins. And the reason I begin with Batman Begins has a really interesting thing. How many villains, actual comic book villains, now we're using this term loosely right now, is in Batman Begins. Now I'm going to give you about 15 seconds to think about it, and then I'm going to tell you what I think. Now, if you've had time to think about it. And there's possibly, I can think most people will come up with one of three answers. Okay? The most common answer will probably be two. The second to that will probably be one, and then obviously there's always the option of three, which is probably going to be a more rare option. Okay, I count five, and now you're saying, what are you talking about? Well, first of all, Ra's al Ghul is the villain in the movie. That's not an argument. That's a fact. He's the main villain, and he is the centerline villain. Thus, he is the... If you want to say there's only one villain, he's the villain. Okay. Next, you can bring up Scarecrow. Scarecrow does do things, but essentially Scarecrow is a henchman. He doesn't really, for the most part, he doesn't really fight Batman. He only has one fight scene. And he's just there as a henchman. Now, the third one, people will probably come up with, probably differs between two people. Some people notice Zsasz was in the movie, and he does have a fight scene, and he does get beaten by Batman's girl, Rachel Dawes, in the movie. But he has two scenes in the movie. But then Falcone. Now, I count all four of those villains. I also count Joe Chill, the guy who killed him. Because can you really state the guy who started this entire ball is not a villain? Can you really state the whole reason this is started, the guy who started it? I mean, yes. I also consider the guy in Spider-Man who killed Uncle Ben to be a villain, because these guys are the ones that set the ball rolling. Thus, they should be considered a villain. Very loosely termed, but still a villain. Now, this is not the only movie I see this. There's a lot of movies where I see this and people don't really look at it like... I've been in arguments where people are trying to tell me one person's a villain, one person's not a villain. And it's kind of weird, because I can see... A villain is somebody who, in my terms, a villain in a movie, not a superhero, not a super villain, and not a costume villain, because if you use those two terms... You take Lex Luthor out of the equation, and he's the main villain in one, and he's the main villain in Return. So, thus, he has to be considered a villain, and he has no superpowers, and he never wears a costume. So, at least in movies he didn't. He wears a suit. If you want to call a suit a costume, it's not. But yeah, so it's really fascinating looking at this and kind of like tearing this apart and really looking at what is a villain in a superhero movie. And I really want to know what you think. Now let's go into another movie. How many villains are in Batman Returns? I'll give you about 15 seconds to think about it, and I want you to come up with the best answer you can. Da-na, 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 da. Da-na, da-na, da. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Da-na-da-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na-na. Now, I think most people, now that you've had time to think, I think most people will come up with probably the most common, and 90% of people are probably going to say 2. And I kind of agree with that. But I add up the 2 differently. Okay? This movie is actually where it started. I mean, yes, Batman Begins kind of has that 5 thing going, and people don't notice the other 3. But in this film, nobody notices the main villain of the movie. And no, it's not Penguin, and I don't even kind of consider Catwoman to be a villain. I consider the main villain of the movie to be that businessman, Max Schreck. First of all, he creates Catwoman. He essentially creates Penguin because he kind of, I think he's responsible for Penguin. I know he gets kidnapped in the movie, but I always considered him to be the main villain because he's doing the villainous things. And if you don't consider him, I think it's weird. Because he is the villain of the movie. I mean, he doesn't wear a costume. But he's not a named Batman villain. So, that cannot always be used as a concept. But I'm pretty sure there are movies that don't use actual named villains in their movies. Catwoman, for instance. And that's a businesswoman. But that's a horrible film. And Elektra, same thing. I don't know if they're actually in the comics. But those are horrible films, and those are not good examples of what I'm talking about. But essentially, what is a villain in a movie? And this is the question I ask you. What do you decide, what is your criteria for a villain in a movie? I can go on and talk more about this, but I think I've gotten the point out, and I think I'm kind of at the point where I can finally give the reins to you guys to come up with your videos or your comments. Any comments, just be respectful when you do a comment. So this is Goku Porto 71, and see you next time, YouTube.